This video is sponsored by the visual learning app, Imprint. Discover life-changing insights from philosophy, psychology, and much more through engaging bite-sized lessons. Get a free 7-day trial and 20% off using my link in the description. You ask advice. Ah, what a very human and very dangerous thing to do. For to give advice to a man who asks what to do with his life implies something very close to egomania. To presume to point a man to the right and ultimate goal, to point with a trembling finger in the right direction, is something only a fool would take upon himself. These words were written by the American journalist and author Hunter S. Thompson when he was just 22 years old. It was part of a letter he wrote to a friend who was seeking life advice. Unbeknownst to Thompson at the time, these lines would go on to define his own life. As most advice is, his words were as much for himself as they were for his friend. Throughout Thompson's life, he would follow suit in this advice and remain unequivocally guided by his own trembling finger, knowing there is no right way and always going his own, taking and giving up control, always on his own terms, challenging the status quo and venturing into new, greater depths of artistry and consciousness. Forging a new genre of literary journalism and writing numerous masterpieces, Thompson would go on to become one of the most prominent American writers of the mid to late 20th century, his work shining with the neon lights, oozing with the blood, and intoxicating with the substances of the time. Thompson was born in 1937 in Louisville, Kentucky, to a middle-class family. When he was 14, his father passed away of a chronic autoimmune disorder, leaving Hunter's mother, Virginia, to take care of Hunter and his two brothers. To make ends meet, she worked as a librarian, which inevitably exposed Hunter to a more than usual number of books at an early age. Soon, Thompson would develop a keen interest in reading and writing, literature becoming a crucial psychic anchor for him from here forward. Around this time, not long after his father's passing, the Thompson family began to sink into the lower middle class. His mother sank into alcoholism, and Hunter sank into crime. A stark dichotomy between two opposing sides of Thompson began to form: a literary genius and a reckless, crime-committing individualist. In high school, having formed big ambitions of becoming a writer, he joined and was accepted to the Athenaeum Literary Association, a long-standing literary and social club. Simultaneously, he joined in on heavier drinking and criminal activity. At age 17, Thompson was arrested for accessory to robbery. He served 31 days in jail, which caused him to miss his final exams in high school and thus his graduation. As part of his parole and a deal with a judge, Thompson enlisted in the Air Force following getting out of jail. Still set on writing, he managed to land his first writing job in the military as the sports editor of the Command Courier, despite having no formal experience, which he lied about. A couple years into military service, Thompson was recommended by his commanding officer to take an early leave with honorable discharge. His superiors ultimately found his rebellious and conceited attitude less than optimal for military conditions. Following the military, Thompson would remain steadfast in his aims of writing. He began freelancing for various newspapers and magazines, hopping from place to place, country to country. This proved to be a difficult way of making a living. For years, he made very little money and very little headway, but his ambitions, focus, and discipline toward writing, his resoluteness to find and create his own way, appeared unbreakable. In 1965, at age 28, this determination would pay off as Thompson received his first big break. The editor of the magazine The Nation hired him to write an article on the newly prominent motorcycle gang, the Hells Angels. 2 months later, his article was published, and his career was ignited. The article did so well, Thompson quickly received book offers to expand it. He accepted a book deal from Random House and began writing it. For his research process, Thompson spent a year living with the Hells Angels, fully immersed and welcomed in as if he was a member himself. The novel would ultimately cover this time he spent with the Hells Angels, from the motorcycle travels, to the bars, to the violent crimes, all filtered through Thompson's unique sensibilities and translated through his budding, unique prose. This all came to a head, however, when Thompson tried to stop one of the Hells Angels from beating his wife and dog. Thompson told this individual, "Only a punk beats his wife and dog." This, as one might imagine, didn't go over very well, and resulted in a broken rib and badly beaten face for Thompson. When the novel came out, however, titled Hells Angels, it was also a huge hit. This sort of violent, abusive, and misogynistic behavior was not a rare case in the world of late 1960s America. To get a better sense of the world Thompson was living in In a TV interview he and a Hells Angels member did with CBC, the audience laughed as the Hells Angels member made jokes about the other member beating his wife and dog, while Thompson was essentially made a mockery of for caring and stepping in. Though, at this time, racism, sexism, violence, hatred, and corruption were the norm, they were rubbing up against an expanding moral consciousness carried out by countercultural movements like the 60s hippie movement. There were growing efforts, hopes, and promises of greater peace, acceptance, and societal function. Thompson, however, was not so confident in this optimism, and was critical of the ineptitudes and hypocrisies on all sides. He was both aware and affected by the violent clash of the shameful status quo and the inept countercultural movements. Perceptively, he saw the incoming consequences of the failed subcultures and political disarray. This is partly what compelled Thompson toward the Hells Angels. They were a unique microcosmic manifestation of the times. In an interview regarding the Hells Angels, Thompson said, "I think one of the most important things is to recognize that we do have this mounting violence in us, and then to find the reasons. Once you find that, it's like curing a boil. If people insist on saying, 'I'm a very gentle person, and only these little bad gang of hoodlums over there is ugly and mean,' then it's just putting off the recognition that the same venom that the angels are spewing around in public, a lot of people are just keeping bottled up in private." Throughout his career and life more broadly, Thompson was especially interested in the American dream, the American ethos that every individual has the right and opportunity to pursue and attain a better life. More specifically, however, Thompson was not merely interested in what this idea stood for, but what people often fell for in pursuit of it. Witnessing political corruption, police brutality, needless war, and the failure of countercultural movements to meaningfully enact social change, Thompson felt the conditions of things were, in his words, Christ, it's bad. Underneath the prosperity of Americanism was an underbelly of violence, greed, corruption, excess, and an emptiness that was bloating. Thompson is most widely known for his novel Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which was published in 1971. The novel began as a straightforward journalistic assignment to cover the Mint 400 motorcycle race in Las Vegas for Sports Illustrated magazine, but it quickly turned into a strange, visceral, hallucinogenic, and innovative literary work that explored the decay, false promises, and depravity of the American dream. The novel follows the fictional journalist Raoul Duke and his attorney Dr. Gonzo as they travel to Las Vegas to cover the Mint 400. When they arrive, their focus turns toward a hunt for the American dream. Las Vegas, being the land of excess, perhaps the capital of the world in this regard, is, in the mind of Thompson, the perfect backdrop for this hunt, the logical conclusion of the American ideal and a pulsing, illuminated embodiment of its death. A place where the games are rigged and mostly everyone loses. A place where depraved behavior is not only allowed but promoted. A place where money buys you into almost anything, and once you're in, almost everything is fueled by chaos and false promises of happily ever after. In the novel, the subsequent escapade of Duke and Gonzo is a drug-induced chaotic haze of excess, fueled by paranoia, underscored by the failed ideals of the 1960s counterculture, and backdropped by the decadence of resort casinos. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is widely regarded as one of the most important pieces of American literature from the 1960s and 70s, and perhaps the entire 20th century. It is renowned not merely for its content, but its form, the style and approach that the novel takes. It is not quite fiction, but certainly not quite nonfiction. It is not quite a novel, but certainly not quite journalism. It finds itself somewhere in between and outside all designated forms. Duke and Gonzo are fictional characters, with many of their experiences and observations being either fictional or fictitiously exaggerated. But the novel is a recounting of the real experiences and events had or witnessed by Thompson, Duke, and his friend and associate, Oscar Zeta Acosta, Gonzo, an activist and attorney, while both were on a real trip to Las Vegas for the Mint 400 and a drug enforcement conference. The piece seeks to recount real events with real people and real experiences for the purposes of real journalistic insights, but it places the weight of first-hand experience and imaginative sensibilities equally on the scale of truth. It puts Thompson's imaginative perspective in the story central to it. This literary style would come to be known as Gonzo or Gonzo journalism, which was coined and based on Thompson's work, originally a prior piece covering the Kentucky Derby. In Gonzo journalism, the end piece is equal parts subjective as it is objective. The journalist is largely central to the story, exaggerating and melding the truth with their imagination and typically humor, as opposed to being a detached observer reporting facts alone. To paraphrase the American journalist Frank Mankiewicz, It is not factual, but it is accurate. Gonzo journalism shows that, or at least asks, are not the particular subjective filters by which facts and events are processed and imagined in a moment in history as relevant as the facts themselves in understanding the truth of that moment, or at least a slice of the truth? Throughout the decades following Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Thompson would continue to write a variety of pieces in a variety of forms. Most notably, he wrote and published Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail in 1973, which, using Gonzo style, recounts Thompson's experience following the 1972 presidential election, all while satirizing and critiquing political journalism itself, showcasing the malleability and biases inbuilt in the coverage of politicians. This book, too, was a huge success. By this point, in the mid-70s, Thompson's public persona was beginning to outpace him. He became a rock star journalist, known by nearly everyone and adored by Hollywood's biggest names. He soon had multiple movies based on him and his work. Carrying out journalistic endeavors became increasingly difficult for him, and his vision of writing began to blur, further induced by heavy substance and self-abuse, as the lifelong companions of drugs and chaotic behavior nestled closer. The lines between his larger-than-life character and his work, his public persona, and his true self began to blur. "I'm really in the way as a person, and the myth has taken over," Thompson said. "I find myself an appendage. I'm not only no longer necessary, I'm in the way. It'd be much better if I died. Then people could take the myth and make films." Though Thompson's persona is deeply intertwined and pertinent to his story, it can often overshadow a much more subtle, humble, compassionate, and remarkably articulate essence that deserves equal spotlight. He was not merely the character he portrayed in his work and public life, but the man who cared enough and was talented enough to create this character in order to explore, understand, and represent a very nuanced condition of the world during his time. In the end, Thompson sort of found his American dream. Not necessarily in the romantic sense, but in the holistic sense, the sense that includes that form found in Las Vegas. He lived with a deep, rebellious spirit, sure to always go his own way, going right up to the edges of every cliff he reached, looking out at the vast plains of past, present, and future, staring down the lethal drop-offs but a few inches from his toes, not without fear, but in spite of it. It is often said that there's a fine line between genius and crazy, and it can perhaps be said that Hunter S. Thompson snorted that line. He lived with both the chaos, courage, and depravity that he wrote about. He indulged in the excess. He was a product of the American dream, and thus an embodiment of it. And if his story, his American dream, couldn't be any more poetically American, it ended with a gun. The American dream is perhaps alive and well. It just might be lethal. Thompson's life and work served as both a welcoming of a new style of journalism and a warning against the state of the Western world, America in particular. His work questions where all our dreaming goes. What happens when we awake the next morning? It critiques the luxury of excess and asks, is it all worth it, what we are chasing? But perhaps most importantly, it answers the question that Thompson's friend asked him when he was still just 22 years old. In that aforementioned letter about what one ought to do in life, Thompson continued, "Every man is the sum total of his reactions to experience. As your experiences differ and multiply, you become a different man, and hence your perspective changes. The answer, then, must not deal with goals at all, or not with tangible goals anyway. In short, a man who has found meaning has not dedicated his life to reaching a predefined goal, but he has rather chosen a way of life he knows he will enjoy. The goal is absolutely secondary. It is the functioning toward the goal which is important. The directions we go in life are far less important than whose finger it is that we are following. In Thompson's case, that trembling pointing finger always remained his own, even up until the last choice he made. And in this, he reminds us, in the most extreme sense, to take control over our lives and live them on our own terms, to step outside the lines, to curve and blur them, to make new ones, to inhale them. He shows us that our work and our lives are always an ongoing process of change, of effort, of labor, of pain, of hope, of laughing, of tripping, of meandering, of loving, and of dying, in hopes that the story will continue in the words of others. His life was as much a part of his work as the words on the pages, each breath as much as each line, revealing the difficulties of making it through this world with any resemblance to the person you were when you came in, while also showing the unbelievable thrill of the whole process. In order to better find the directions we want to go in life, in order to better follow through with those directions, adopting the nuances of existence along the way, we must continually be learning and considering the lessons and insights of others, from those who have already gone certain routes, thinkers, experts, and doers. This video sponsor, Imprint, helps take all the vast information from areas like philosophy, psychology, health, history, and so much more, and distill it down into beautiful, immersive, and engaging courses and bite-sized lessons. Comprising visual art, motion, gamification, and carefully chosen words, Imprint imbues the learning process with the satisfaction that we crave. From timeless principles found in ancient philosophy, to modern theories on productivity, meaning, and happiness, to essentially anything you are interested in, Imprint helps you break through the noise of the modern world with a pleasant melody of personal enrichment. Your learning habits become built into how you use technology every day, thus helping you engage less in the mind-numbing content that is spoon-fed to you at every opportunity, and instead, more into what helps clear and focus the mind. It's a completely new way to learn, built for the modern age. With over 50,000 5-star reviews on the App Store and Google Play, and winning awards like Google's App of the Year and Apple's Essential Education app, Imprint has proven that it is an incredible tool to invest in yourself with. Use my link in the description below to sign up for Imprint, and you'll receive a 7-day free trial and 20% off your annual premium membership. And of course, as always, thank you so much for watching in general, and see you next video.